Bezras Hashem. Bezras Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Basra daf Kuf Samach Tes, and we're going to start from Kuf Samach Ches and Beis. Tanu Rabbanim. Okay, the to Kuf Samach Ches and Beis about like 6 lines from the bottom. So just to review, I mean, here we're discussing our conversation is regarding somebody who lost a deed. Imagine you have a piece of property and you lost the deed, the contract of sale that shows you own the property. You just lost it. So do they write you another one? Or what happens? You lent somebody money and you had a loan document and you lost it. So what's the din? Now, one thing about a loan, obviously, is that that if you buy a piece of if you lend somebody money and he doesn't pay you back, you can repossess his properties, even if he sold it to somebody else, if your loan preceded his sale of his property. So basically, you could loan somebody money with a lien on his property so that if he sells it to somebody else, you can repossess that piece of land. So Tana Rabbanim, the rabbis taught, Harei Shabov a man comes and said, Avad Shtar Choivi, I lost my loan document, right? So I lost my loan document. So Afil P, even though Sha'amru Adim said, Anu Kasavnu, we wrote up the document, V'chasamnu, and we signed the document. V'nasasananu, and we gave it to the lender. So it was really in the hands of the lenders. You have witnesses that probably can say what the loan amount of it is, and the lender is saying, "I lost my loan document." Ein koisrun loy as a star. You don't write him a brand new document, and not that he loses his loan. Probably it's he probably can collect on it, but he can't go collect on he can't go maybe first of all yeah, because maybe he never even lost it. Maybe the other guy paid for it. That's the paid back the loan. So you never even write him a new document. So you don't write him a new document by a loan document. You lost it, too bad. Because even if he says, "Oh, I'm not going to collect from land, I'm not going to repossess anybody's land," perhaps the borrower paid you back and you never really lost it. Or maybe what could happen with a loan document is that he write him a new loan document and he still has the old document. And so he'll collect from his borrower twice. So therefore you never write him a new one. You lost it, that's you got to be better at that. Avo, but Shitri Mekach Memkar, a guy who bought a piece of property from somebody, and then he claims he lost the deed that shows the contract of sale that he bought the property. Oh, in that case, Koisvin, you write him a new document. You write him a new document because basically he wants proof that he's the owner of the land, that he actually paid for it. So if you have witnesses that actually saw the sale, then you rewrite the deed. Chutz, but except minachrayis shaboy. Normally, there's title insurance. When you buy a piece of property, the seller guarantees that if somebody would take away the property because I borrowed money from that person, so then that's called title insurance. That's so then the purchaser of the property can go back to the seller if someone takes away his property, and if the seller doesn't have any money to pay the purchaser back, the seller could go repossess properties that the seller sold to other people if his sale preceded the other people's sale. So just to visualize it, I put up the you have a creditor that repossesses. You have a seller selling buyer number one some land. And buyer number one now goes to the seller and says, "Hey, they repossessed my land, and I bought this piece of property from you." Seller has no money because he couldn't even pay his creditors. The buyer can go to a previous buyer and who bought a property after he bought his property and repossess that property. So now you can see what's going to happen over here. if this buyer number one lost his purchase document, we don't write him. We write him another to show that he owns the land, but we don't write title insurance in the document because it could be that he still has the original document. And what could happen is that he can, if the creditor comes and repossesses buyer number one's land, he will pull out two documents. One, he'll repossess buyer number two's land, and then when he gets that, he's going to repossess buyer number three's land. So, you don't write him title insurance back into the Gemara if somebody lost his deed, that he owns a property that he bought from somebody. That's the opinion of who? Of the Tanakama. We go to Kuf Samach Taf Samad Aleph. Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says, Af Shitri Mekach Umemka Ein Koisvin. He says that if somebody lost his purchase document, we don't even write one back. Why? So we're going to learn that we don't replace it. Too bad you lost it, because we are afraid that you bought a piece of property and now you have a piece of paper that shows that the buyer owns the property. But Rab Shimon ben Gamliel says, if you would give that piece of paper back to the person you bought it from, let's say you want to give him a gift back, so that person doesn't have to make a brand new document. He just gets back the original document he gave you that he sold you the land, and that would be enough. So we are afraid that the purchaser, the buyer, in a feeling of goodwill, gave the document, his original document, back to the seller, and he regretted it now. So now he claims, "Oh, I lost my first document," and you're going to write him a new document, but really the land doesn't belong to him anymore. He gave it back to the seller, and that's why you don't write a new document for somebody who lost his deed. He lost his purchase contract. The Rab Shimon ben Gamliel said, same idea. If someone gives a gift to his friend, now the person return the document back that he doesn't want the gift, or he's returning the gift back to the giver. So let's say A gifted B a piece of land and he wrote it in a document, and B now returned the document back to A. So who's the owner of the land? A is the owner of the land. Even though A did not make a new kinyan, or they didn't write a brand new document that B is now gifting it to A, just by the fact that B returned the document that A wrote for him, Chazra Matanose, the gift was returned. And so that's why Rav Shimon ben Gamliel held, since you can transfer ownership very fast, we don't write a new contract of sale for somebody who claims he lost it, because could be he already gifted it back to the seller. The Chacham says Matanose Kayemes. Even if you will return the document, the gift document, back to its giver, the land still belongs to the recipient. Okay, we're going to discuss this more in the Gemara tomorrow. Amamar. We learned in the previous Gemara and the Brisa that if someone claims he lost his purchase document of a piece of property, you write him a new document, says the Tanakama, but except you don't put the title insurance in the document. Chutz me'achraya shaboy. You don't put title insurance in the replacement deed, a replacement contract that he claims he lost. My Tama, what's the reason? Rav Safra said, we don't write two purchase documents on one field. Even if the guy claimed, I lost my first purchase document. Because Dilma, Ozel Balchoyev Taraf Leilahai, Va'ozel Hai Umapel Leichad V'Taraf Lekuches. So I'm going to, if you see it on the picture over here, we're afraid that the creditor of the seller will now repossess the buyer number one's property. So buyer number one can't go back to the seller to get his money back because seller has no money. So buyer number one will go to buyer number two and repossess his land because buyer number one preceded a sale. Then what's going to happen is, and this is what the Gemara is telling us now, the creditor, buyer number one, is going to keep the land in his possession because he repossessed buyer number two's land, and then creditor Bal Choiv is going to come and repossess buyer number one's land again, And buyer number one has another document because he still has two documents. Remember, he has two purchase documents. So if you allow him title insurance, he's going to repossess buyer number three's land, and therefore he's going to just make this ruse with the creditor to get two extra pieces of land, which he doesn't deserve. So that's what he says. Amar Rav Safra. Rav Safra said, you don't write two documents on one field. Maybe the creditor of the seller will repossess this one. And this one and the buyer will come out and the taraf lekuches. He's going to repossess another buyer's property. And then he will tell the original creditor, shufli, wait, be quiet, that this land should remain in my possession for a while, and then make a repossess it again, repossess my land, and that would allow me to repossess buyer number three's land. So basically, creditor and buyer number one are going to enter this like secret agreement where creditor repossesses buyer number one's property. So buyer number one, who now has two documents that he bought a field because he claimed he lost the one, but he really has it. So buyer number one will repossess buyer number two's property. And when creditor repossesses that land again, so then buyer number one will repossess buyer number three's property. So basically he's going to split the profits with the creditor, and that could lead to a problem. That is why when we write, if someone claims that he lost his purchase document, we only write it up, the replacement document, without any insurance, which will now not allow to buyer number one to repossess land. That's what the Gemara's solution is. Says the Gemara, wait a second. But how could the Baal Choiv repossess buyer number one's land twice? When he repossessed it the first time and foreclosed on it, we ripped up his loan document. The kivan the tekar l'shtar demalva, since we already ripped up the document of the lender, but my hadar tarifla, how is he going to go ahead and repossess and foreclose on the property? Once you foreclose on a property, we tear up the loan document. Are you going to say that you don't rip it up? But that's not true. The halacha is that you do rip it up. Once somebody foreclosed on a property because of a loan, and he repossessed somebody else's property, so then we rip up the loan document because he got paid. Rav Nachman said, "Call tirfa the leksibe karina l'shtar demava lav tirfahu." Anytime you repossess somebody's, you have a claim that you're looking for a land to repossess, and you repossessed it, and you didn't write that we ripped up his loan document, then that's not a good, his repossessing of the land is disqualified. So you have to write in the document that he's repossessing this land because of an outstanding loan, and now we're ripping the loan document because he's been paid back. And the same idea, there's a few steps in this process before you can foreclose on somebody's properties. First of all, you have to get permission from Bezdin to search for a property because your borrower is not paying you back. And secondly, the Bezdin has to, once you identify a property, Bezdin has to do an appraisal of the property to see that you're not repossessing somebody's property more than what you lent him. But once all that's taken care of, after you actually foreclose on the property, they actually rip up the document. So the question is, how is it that you're claiming that the creditor, back onto the screen, the creditor and the buyer number one are going to get into bed with each other, and basically the creditor is going to repossess buyer number one's land, and now buyer number one will repossess buyer number two's property, and because buyer number one has two purchase documents because he claimed he lost one, creditor Baal Choiv will repossess whatever buyer number one repossessed from buyer number two, and Now, once creditor does this twice, buyer number one will repossess buyer number three's land. So, but how could the creditor, the Balchov, repossess a property? Once he does it once, we rip up his loan document. And says the Gemara, like tzricha, it's not like tzricha, the ka'asui mikoyach avusay. Not always does a Balchov repossess a land. We're saying that the creditor, that he's not a Balchov. Really, the reason why this guy is claiming buyer number one's property is not his is because he claims it was his ancestors. He claims that the seller was a crook and stole the property from him. So he can do that twice because now he doesn't have a loan document to rip up. He just brings false witnesses that maybe that the document was that this was his ancestors' property. Then buyer number one is going to repossess buyer number two's property, and once again, after a little bit of time, this guy is going to come back and to buyer number one says, "Oh, this property also was my ancestors' property, and the seller stole it from me." So that's why we never write two documents on one field, which each one will have title insurance, because it could lead to fraud. Amalei Rav Acha Medifdil Ravina. So Rav Acha said to Ravina, "Lamali lemeim lebal chayv shufli b'hayar ve'ekim ba. Take it late. Kiva denaka treishtara taraf hada taraf." What do I care that why do we have to say to the Baal Chayv that let me stay on this land after buyer number one repossesses buyer number two's property? Why does he have to say, "Oh, wait, quiet, and let me hold on to that property"? Let him do it 1, 2, 3. As soon as buyer number one takes over buyer number two's property, let the guy come back and say, "Oh, this was my ancestor's property." Why does buyer number one have to stay a little bit on the land till everything dies down? Why can't he do this one after another? Repossess buyer number two's property and repossess buyer number three's property. Why does he have to wait a little bit till time passes? So the Gemara says the reason why you wait till time passes so people don't get suspicious. It came nefisha all about didiv. It looks like you're coming to court so fast, one after another, and so people will get suspicious about what's going on over here. That's why you let some time pass before something like this would happen. Before you come back to business and say, "Oh, the guy took back the property that I repossessed. So let me go to buyer number three." Anyway, that's the bottom line of this Gemara. Says the Gemara, I have another solution. In Sky claims he lost the ashtar. He lost his document. So why do we write him a new document, but it doesn't give him title insurance? No, let's do it this way. Let's give him a replacement document with title insurance. And then write a receipt to the seller. Any other levar min the yipuk bezimnin da. Any other star that comes after the replacement star is invalid, and we give this receipt to the seller. So basically, you're voiding out. It's like you call up the bank and you cancel the check and you replace it. So what basically you should do is give a receipt to the seller saying that we're canceling the first document. So even if the buyer number one finds it, it's going to be a disqualified document because the only thing that's going to matter is the new document that you're writing. And who's going to hold on to the receipt? We're going to demand that the seller is going to hold on to the receipt. Even though the buyer was the one that lost the document, we're going to make the seller hold on to the receipt. So the fact that the Gemara didn't give that solution, that proves ein kaisvin shover. When anytime, if it's, we never demand from somebody to hold on to a receipt. For example, a borrower that pays back a loan, he can demand that he gets the loan document back so he could rip it up. We can't put an onus on the borrower to now hold on to a receipt that he paid his loan because the loan document is still outstanding by the lender. And if the borrower loses the receipt, then the lender could recollect again. So isn't that proof that we never write receipts? We never force people to hold on to a receipt. So the Gemara says, Amud Beis, Amalahu, Ba'alma Kaisvin Shema. We do write receipts. And in the case of a loan, we would write a receipt to the borrower that, listen, you paid back the loan. And we don't demand that the lender give back the loan document. The reason why we don't hold the seller to hold on to receipt, because it doesn't make sense if he holds on to receipt, because it's not going to help anyway. The dilma also tarif balchoy, the tarif minei de lekeach, the also e the tarif lekuchos, v'shoyve gabel keches leika. So what's going to happen is that if the balchoiv forecloses on the buyer number one's property, when buyer number one goes to buyer number two to repossess his property because he gave his land to the creditor, buyer number two is not going to check with the seller if he has a receipt. He's just going to hand it over his land to buyer number one. And then that's it. So he's because buyer number two doesn't hold on to the receipt, so he doesn't know anything about any receipt. So that's the question. So that's why you don't write a receipt, because it's not going to help you anyway. So the Gemara says, why not? Will the people, buyer number two is going to have to eventually go back to the seller and say, hey, they repossessed my land, and now you owe me money. But then the seller's going to say, hey, wait a second, why'd you give it to buyer number one? I have a receipt that the creditor was paid, or that he shouldn't have repossessed your land. So that's the question. Till they have this conversation, shamet v'achal peri. Until that happens, first of all, buyer number one repossessed the land, so he's going to be eating up all the fruits of the land until buyer number two or buyer number three comes aware that there's a receipt here. So then, in the meantime, buyer number one was eating up this fruits, and he won't be able to pay it back. So therefore, it doesn't help that we should have the seller holding on to the receipt. Or let's say buyer number three, let's say, did not write any title insurance when he bought his land. So when buyer number one repossesses the land belonging to buyer number three, so then buyer number three is never going to go back to the seller and say, oh, give me back my money. He has no title insurance. So everything will continue very quietly. That's why, in order to prevent that, we know it doesn't help to have the buyer hold on to the receipt, to the seller hold on to a receipt that the buyer lost his contract. Says the Gemara, if this is so, shitri halva nami. When someone makes a loan, let's go back down to a loan. You have a loiva who made a loan. Why do we make the borrower hold on to a receipt if when the creditor takes from buyer number one will go to buyer number two to repossess his land, and if he has and in case creditor comes back and repossesses buyer number one's land, he's going to go to buyer number three, and you have the same problem. That why do we allow, in this case, you said a receipt is okay, but why? You have the same problem by the seller. So the answer the Gemara is going to give is very simple. Here, before buyer number two or buyer number three gives their land to buyer number one, since this was a loan, right? Since this was a loan, they're going to ask if the lova, if the borrower actually has a receipt, because did he pay money? Maybe he paid the money to the creditor. But in this case, buyer number one doesn't want money. He's actually got his land taken away from him. So therefore, he's asking for land, and therefore they're going to give up their land without asking the seller, is there any receipt involved over here? That's what the Gemara is saying, basically. Answers the Gemara, Hasan, by a regular loan to Zuzi Maskik, where you borrowed money. Amre, Paisi Balchoy Bezuze. The one, before they give their land to somebody who wants to repossess it, they're going to ask the borrower, did you actually pay back the loan? Over here, the Ara Masik, everybody knows that he lost his land. The purchaser bought a land, now it got taken away from him. So when he goes ahead and takes somebody else's land, made the people that he's taking their land away from, the man the Masakara, somebody who's owed land, Bezuza lemepais, he doesn't want money, he actually wants the land. So they're not going to speak it over to the seller, oh, is there a receipt involved over here? Nu Gemara, Amamar, we learned before. Chutz min achrei shabai. So hecher kasvin. How do you write a document without title insurance? Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman says the kasui hachi. You write in the document the following: Shatri didan deloy migve deloy mishtade veloy b'mechari. This document that we're writing as a replacement, you cannot use it to if in case the land gets taken away from him, there is no title insurance. So why are we writing a document that he bought the land if there's no title insurance? Because we want the land to remain in the purchasers. So as long as nobody forecloses on the land, it belongs to the purchaser. But if someone forecloses on the land because of an outstanding loan, the purchaser has no insurance. That's how you have to put those words into the document. So we'll finish up one half a minute over here. Amar Rafram said, Zaysemeres, that's proof that whenever a document does not have title insurance, achrayis, if it's missing title insurance, toy soiferu. That's a mistake of the scribe. And every document, even if it doesn't have title insurance, we consider it as if it does have title insurance in it. And if it was left out, it's accident of the scribe. Because time at the cost of lehachi, lehachi gavi. The whole reason why you could undo title insurance is because you have to make a notation. Don't write any title insurance. Why do you have to make a whole Megillah that there is no title insurance? Because if you don't write anything, the assumption is that there is title insurance. And the fact that a document doesn't have title insurance in it is because the sofer let it out, forgot to write it. So that's why you have to write this document. So we see Achrayas Toy Sofer comes along Rav Ashi, and this will end. Achrayas Lav Toy Sofer. If something is missing title insurance in a document, it's not a mistake of the scribe. There is no title insurance. It's not written in the document. What does it mean you write a document without title insurance? You don't write any title insurance in the document. That's it. You write it without title insurance. But you don't have to write a whole footnote that there is no title insurance, because it's understood that if you don't write any title insurance, there is no title insurance in this document. That's a machlekes in the Masechta B'Metzia regarding Achrayas Toy Sefer. Okay, we'll continue on with Hahi. It's tomorrow, Bez Hashem.
Thank you.